I'd like to welcome all of you back now to Lesson 3 of the Chiropractic Associate Mastery Program. Today we're going to take a deep dive looking into our work agreements, or the contracts that we use to define the relationship with our associates. So I'm going to go through a bunch of different points and then actually bring up my sample work agreements and go through reading it and presenting it and some concepts around that. And so just my Chiropractic Associate Mastery Program with the big asterisk. Again, the asterisk is some assembly required. And so this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 offices of mine. So this was the bay in this building, and this was the bay in this building, and he was on the 8th floor in the back of this building, and this is a strip mall, this is us right here, and we were in the glass front of this building. And, just this vision of, even if it's just blowing up your one office into something where you're leveraging your success into an associate so that more people are served, you have greater flexibility, and you like life even more, that's the asterisk. And so we've done the overview. We've looked at recruiting, and I've spoken to a couple of you already, and you've had some interviews that have been different, and that's encouraging. Today we're going to talk about work agreements, and then the last 4 classes. Once we hire, it's day 1. How do we train? How do we manage? And then how the whole concept of satellite offices, and then both selling satellites or selling a main office when it's appropriate to do that, and how to think about that as well. And so I'm pleased with the feedback. If you have any questions, concerns, comments, make sure you reach me. I'm readily available. And so this is probably the most important slide of the day. I am not a lawyer. And while I've spent thousands of dollars on my agreements, and I've used them live in Pennsylvania, and I've had them hold up through clients that have had associates that have challenged, they've held up in Pennsylvania. I not only encourage, I kind of mandate that whether you start with my sample agreements or anybody else's, or you create your own, you must, in big red capital red letters, have an in your state labor lawyer review your legal agreement. And so there's no way for any of us to understand the 50 different states, and perhaps even down into a city level localities that could have different issues around senior employment and work agreement, labor contracts. And so whatever base you start with, you have to go to an in-state labor lawyer, not your friend's cousin or your cousin or somebody that's a lawyer that doesn't do this every day. So it's probably $1,000, maybe it's $2,000 even. But you have to know that you have the strongest contract in your area, in your state, legally. And so my overall encouragement, or my overall first point is that the work agreement needs to protect you, needs to protect the practice, needs to protect the community, needs to protect our patients, needs to protect the staff, and we need to protect it from the associate. And so today we're going to look at the 2 work agreements and when I use them. Point number 1 is, and for my fellow Gibson legacy clients, right, I always found this point to be beneficial. So I call it a work agreement as opposed to a contract. It seems a little less threatening and more friendly. And so the classic story was the prospective associate was concerned and had heard negative things about contracts. Doc, you don't have one of those work contracts, do you? No, prospective associate. We have friendly work agreements. We just define the relationship up front while we're still friendly before we're fighting. All of our associates have loved it. Oh, okay. And so, oftentimes associates hear weird pieces of weird information, or they don't process it, like they don't have the context to process it. And so, again, I call it a work agreement. and we're agreeing to the rules of the relationship up front, right? And so we keep it friendly, but again, we want it to be super legal, right? I've gotten solicited for different associate programs where the entire program was, you need to have a work agreement and here's mine, right? And so that leads me to believe still there's tons of chiropractic associates that are working today that are working under kind of a handshake agreement. And while I guess if it works, it's okay, but I want to have a legal agreement. And in fact, this is another big point. If this was the only thing that you remembered from today, I'd probably be okay with it, right? The associate cannot start work in any official capacity until he or she has signed the work agreement. So the work agreement is a condition of employment. And if the employee starts before this happens, they can challenge the entire agreement. And so you don't want that to happen. And so you need to understand all the issues that are pertinent or that I've identified as pertinent. I guess there could be others, but mine's grown after having run into different issues along the way. And then you need to make sure that you understand how it's applied in your neck of the woods. And recognize that with the court systems, in any individual case, the particularities are going to come into play. And a court could decide anything, but like the work agreement is, it's like the document that we're going to refer to in trying, even if the relationship goes sideways with the associate, as long as there's no violations, red flag violations of stuff we're going to talk about, the associate can go outside of the non-compete area and live happily ever after. And I'm going to show you one of my office's case story later, where 3 of the docs didn't make it before the 4th one did, and they're all out doing their thing, whatever that is. And so as long as they don't violate the work agreement, they can disentangle. All right, and so here are some of the issues right off the get-go, time-wise, lengthwise. Effective date, and so that's the date that they start or even the date that they sign the agreement, right? And so it should be current. It should be, July 12th, 2018. And then right off the get-go, most other work agreements that I've seen are 1 year, 2 years, or some length of time. But mine is for an unknown period of time, and later it's going to say that either party can terminate anytime they want. And so I've always felt this, where if you have a length of contract, 1 year or 2 years, it's really a negative thing to give away from our side of this agreement, right? So if the employee decides a couple of different things, if the associate decides that they're moving to the beach and they're done, they can just pack up their car and move to the beach and they're done. And you could go after them and you may even get a judgment, but ever really getting paid or being made whole from the associate disappearing is probably unlikely. Even worse than that, if the associate decides that they want to go to the beach, and of course the beach is any other bright shining object, you could fill it in with whatever's appropriate in your neck of the woods, right? But they feel like, well, I have 4 months left on my work agreement, so I'll just work it out. And so that's even worse, where in their head they're already gone, but their body is still showing up. And so we give it away. On the other hand, if we want to get rid of somebody, if we have a defined length of time, again, you could be subject to owing the employee more money if you want to get rid of them. Paying out the coach after you fire them is the sports analogy. And so just in terms of the relationship, right, I feel that it's our job to keep the associate winning with the next carrot out in front of him or her, right, getting to our defined end zone so that we can do the dance together, the Billy White Shoes Johnson dance together. And if it doesn't work for either of us along the way, then we should discontinue that relationship. And so you could put in a time frame, so that you get a couple of weeks notice, right? But really, what's the most that you'd want a semi or fully disgruntled associate around the practice, right? And so if you had a particular need, and it could be 2 or 3 weeks, but it's still probably not going to be enough time to recruit a new associate from scratch, which again reinforces my argument that once we start working with associates, you should be interviewing all the time forever. And so you should have 1 phone call a week and at least 1 live interview a month for an associate, even when you're not really looking, because you are looking long term, whether it kind of feels that way or not. They are an employee. So there's a lot of, again, other programs or ideas where, let's pay them as independent contractors, and everybody tries to get over on the tax, and, nobody ever goes down for that, but I've never, ever done that. So all of my associates have been employees. They get a W-2. I withhold all the taxes. They get a paycheck. I file everything, and, even all the bonuses get reported. And again, I don't want anyone to come snooping, but I'm pretty confident that every employee has been paid properly for 33 years, right? Our role, so we're management, we're ownership, we supply everything, we set the policy, we provide the equipment, we allow them access to our trade secrets. And so let's put this again just into real world perspective. What does this mean? This means the associate can come in and have everything that he or she needs, right? The space, the staff, the equipment, the systems to be wildly successful in going out and being a practicing chiropractor, changing our patients' lives, right? And if they don't come to us hot on fire for that, they should be doing something else. Right? And so what we're creating is this environment to allow typically younger but newer or other docs to become successful just like us. And that's a huge thing that we offer to these docs. Malpractice, and so this is an issue to discuss about associates. So this is another must-have. So your associate must have a minimum of 1 million, 3 million occurrence malpractice. And if you have a preference, you might even mandate who it be with. And so in terms of that, I want my malpractice to be with a AAA rated real insurance company, kind of regardless of the connection to the profession. There are some other things about malpractice, which is an issue to understand on its own, right? I want to have the right to determine whether we settle or not. I don't want to give up that right. I want to be able to practice in, what I would call a structural way. And the issue around malpractice would be basically, if I'm working on a patient, I want to see x-rays, and so that could be a malpractice issue. And so I want to know that my malpractice will defend me practicing that way. It needs to be 1 million, 3 million. That's the standard. And in fact, there's been very few chiropractic settlements beyond that. If you can get 2 million, 4 million, I had it for many years. There were years where, it wasn't offered, it then was offered, and now it's not offered to me again. But if you could get 2 million, 4 million, particularly for you, the senior docs, it's probably worth doing. But it must be occurrence. The associate must have occurrence. And so again, there are 2 types of malpractices. One is occurrence and one is claims made. And just to make sure there's no confusion, here's how to remember. If you happen to get sued for malpractice and you have a claims made policy, you need to have the same policy in effect, both the date of the alleged malpractice and the date that the claim was made. And so the issue becomes, you could have insurance, and then if you don't have insurance in the future, you're no longer covered for the period that you were insured. If you decide to do that, you could buy something called tail coverage, which then does insure you forever for those dates. But with the docs that we're talking about, they never do that. And so occurrence If you are insured on the day that the alleged malpractice occurred, you're insured for that day forever. And so my goal for you, for us, for all of us, is that any day that an employee doc, an employee chiropractor works for us, they have occurrence malpractice, so they're covered forever. Right? I only violated this principle personally one time. The associate came in and had his own malpractice, and it got lost. And of course, the one time that I wasn't on it, his malpractice expired, and there was a small gap issue. Nothing came of it, but the one time I violate my own policy, it comes back to bite me. And so, as part of their pay or a compensation, I'm going to actually pay half of their premium. They're going to pay the other half, so they stay invested in the process as well. But I'm going to withhold their half from their pay. And so whatever the premium is, you cut it in half, you divide that number by by 26, not 24. If you pay every other week, you want to divide it by 26. And so you're going to withhold that every pay from their paycheck. And then when the bill comes in, we pay the bill. And so, again, I want to pay the bill so that I know that the bill is paid. If the associate's responsible for paying the bill, any bill can be second priority to the next living money that they need to have. And so I want to make sure that any day an employee doc works for me, they're properly insured forever. And that's the malpractice. Associate stuff. Should the associate bring any of his or her own property, any books, any equipment, any charts, any posters, anything into the office, they need to mark it clearly property of Dr. Associate. And so this never is an issue until it's an issue, and it's an issue at the end when a doc is clearing out the office of his or her stuff, and they claim that this plastic spine is mine, or this textbook is mine, or whatever. And so the definition is anything in the office is my property unless it's clearly been marked property of Dr. Associate. Right? One time I had an issue with that. Right? Ownership of records. So we remain 100% owners forever and ever, even in a satellite office. The associate, once they terminate from work, has no rights to any records. They have no rights to take records off the physical premises of the practice. Just like in Major League Baseball, they need to get express written consent to take any records off premises. Right? Non-compete. So this is a big issue. Again, I want to be able to explain the need of the non-compete. And to explain to you the need of the non-compete, right? So we're going to be investing a tremendous amount of our resources into our associates. And what I really want to do is to, as always, rule number one, do nothing to damage the mothership. And so all I want to do is to protect my big, huge, enormous, worked hard for, sweating brow every single day since I've been in practice, is to protect that practice. And so, as an example, in Pittsburgh, we have bridges, rivers, and tunnels. And so you could literally walk to the University of Pittsburgh from my office in 15 minutes. But nobody would ever do it because you'd have to cross a bridge and walk up a hill through a little bit of a bad neighborhood. And so I got very few patients. I got some, but I got very few patients from that area. And so I never even excluded it in my non-compete. On the other hand, on my side of the river, literally a 30-minute drive away, I would get new patients from every week. And so I protected that area. And it ended up for me being 3 or 4 zip codes, was 80% of my new patients. And so what I want you to do non-compete-wise is to exclude the area that would really damage your practice, whatever that is. Lay that on top of what you can legally, if that is within what you can legally do, that's what I want you to do. If you have to do something less than that, then legally you got to do something less than that. And again, if you jumped on late, right, I want to encourage all of you that whatever work agreement that you're actually going to have an associate sign, you can feel free to start with mine, but you must take whatever that agreement is to an in your state labor lawyer to have them look it over. It's going to be, a $1,000 to $2,000 bill. Don't let them go too crazy with coming up with a bunch of legal mumbo jumbo. Like if something absolutely has to be added or subtracted, do it. But you want to understand how it's going to be upheld in your state. So they can't practice within that area. They can't take any staff away. They can't take the mailing list, right? All of the things that we're going to exclude. And if they do that, typically there are two types of penalties that you can ask for. One is called liquidated damages, which means it's some bunch of money. And so X amount of dollars for X amount of months, $4,000 a month for 48 months. And or you can ask for injunctive relief. So if they're really trying to open up their own or practice in any way within the excluded area, you can go to court, and if it's their own practice, like I've seen the practices padlocked, and I've also seen docs like removed from practices, it's called injunctive relief. The courts decide that they can't practice in that area, that they uphold your non-compete, right? Other non-compete issues, again, are ownership of the records, the mailing list, any indication, like if the associate would rent space, this is how old this slide is, right? Any online advertising of a practice that's not yours in any way, shape, or form, right? That would be an indication of violation of the non-compete. Again, each state views it differently. Again, I had one client that fought it in Pennsylvania, and the client got a big verdict against the associate. I don't know that the client ever got money, but that associate was not able to open the way that he was designing to. Right, the non-compete, and I'll tell this, I'll look the associate right eye to right eye, as we say, right, with the most solemn and sincere, and it's coming from that place as well, right? So the non-compete will only come into play if they violate the contract and try to open, and I would consider that you'd be trying to steal from me. And if you did that, then I would bring all of my resources to try to wipe you out. However, if we work together and then for some reason we end up not working together, and you don't violate the non-compete clause and you go outside it, assuming that nothing really horrible happens, I'll probably wish you luck. And if I can help you, I'd probably even do that, right? So the non-compete is only if, and we're defining it now, is if I end up feeling that you're trying to steal from me. And they get the severity of it, and that's the real strength of the non-compete. This is another issue that came up. It could be that you end up needing to bill insurance companies under the associate's name and or numbers and or license. And again, my goal would be to bill as 100% compliant as you understand it to be. And so there could be cases where that's the case. So the doctor's financial agreement segment of the work agreement relates to all the monies that are billed for services rendered. And so regardless of how it's billed for, if it's for services rendered at the practice, which is really the only place that they can practice, all the money is ours. And so they have no claim to it as an employee, or even if they're done being an employee, right? So, and it could be, though, that based on how, particularly in a satellite office, that you use the associate's numbers, right? But even in a main office, right? So I want you to bill as compliant as possible, but make it clear that all money belongs to the practice. The pay, right? So I believe in a base pay, it's disappearing in brackets because it doesn't officially disappear, because an officially disappearing base, I'm going to pay you $3,000 a month for 6 months, and then after that it's 25%, and good luck. You could actually fall under the minimum wage and again be subject to labor law. But when it works correctly, we want the base to disappear. And so in my world, it's base, or. Everybody at home say or out loud, so I know that you did it even though I have you all muted, right? Or 25% of their collections. And so in my system, they're going to be responsible for recruiting new patients. There could be a share around the practice, so everybody recruits, and whatever the rotation for assigning patients is, it is, and we'll talk about that coming up. But regardless, they're all going to be responsible for their own numbers. So new patients, visits, collections. They're going to get 25% of their collections. If your goal is to develop a long-term associate, I might go up to 30%, perhaps even 33%, but not more than that. And so there's a slide where I lay it out a little bit better. And so I would always work towards, how does the associate make $100,000 a year as an employee or more? And then if you're trying to drive them to their own office, right, to make $100,000 a year as an employee, and then to make $200,000 a year or more as owner of your own practice forever and ever. And so one of the things is, if we are trying to turn the practice over, the doctor needs to have an enormous upside for taking over ownership of the practice. And so, generically, in a $30,000 collected a month practice on a $15,000 overhead, right? So there's $15,000 in profit. So if they go from making $7,500, 25% of $30,000 as an employee, the next month they buy it. The next month they collect $30,000 again. So now they've made 15. They've made double. And so if they have a $5,000 a month payment to do that, they're still ahead by $5,000 a month, and that payment ultimately will go away. And that doesn't account for any growth. And so in addition to that, surprisingly, it turns out that, the overhead drives up, and we need to make sure that we're getting our end along the way. And so I feel that this is a super fair percentage. I would do a little more if I was building a long-term associate. I pay for half of the required continuing ed hours, right? But those hours need to be actually approved for their license renewal. So it's particularly sensitive in Pennsylvania. We have a goofy system, and sometimes the people running the seminars don't know how to get them officially qualified for the hours that they're advertising. And so I'll pay for half of your required hours, but it has to count towards your license renewal. Practice management seminars, right? I outlined that whatever's provided that they're expected to attend and implement and be present for and be engaged, right? So here's their total compensation. It's their pay. It's 50% malpractice, 50% of continuing ed. I will pay in, right, up to $200 and maybe at this point even $300 a month for health insurance, but it's still $200 in my system. And so here's the question. I want you all to be thinking about this in your exact situation. So at 100 visits a week, in your gut, what should the associate make? Right? And so at 100 visits a week, at $50 a visit, the associate is going to collect $250,000 into the practice. 100 visits a week, right? So they're going to get $62,500 as pay, $2,400 in health insurance, $700 in malpractice, $300 in continuing ed. So it's like $66,000, right? And then plus the tax, so it ends up costing us like $80,000 to $85,000, right? There's going to be other related overhead to them being in the office, more marketing, more equipment, maybe even more space. But we're still going to be able to be big winners if the associate does 100 visits a week. And so it always comes back to this, right? Is how reasonable is it to ask our associates to produce at 100 visits a week? Right? And so if you don't say that, if they don't do that, why have them? I'm with you on that concept. And so the question is how do they make $100,000? And so they need to collect $400,000. And so $400,000 is how many visits in your system, right? And so it's still less than $200 a week. $200 a week at $50 a visit is $500,000, and so it would be $125 plus all this, right? And that's the math that we're going to look at along the way. Just come up for questions. Any questions? Anyone that has audio? Or you could chat me questions. You could post in chat to me. Good. All right. Long-term associate pay. So this person is developing and they're now doing it, and based on production, right? I would go to 30, perhaps 35%, but not more, right? Like, how many months have you practiced where your overhead was 60% or more, right? Why don't you just be the associate and show up at someone else's practice and keep 40% without any of the worries, right? And so again, just in your gut, if the associate collects $300,000, how much should they make? And so if you had a big heart and you said they should make a third of it, and like it was a long-term associate that like allowed you to, great flexibility, you loved working with him or her, and they were an 8 or better out of 10, I'll go along for the ride, but not more than that, not more than a third, right? I'm way more comfortable at $75,000 all day long, right? We're giving them all of the resources, all of the systems, all of the encouragement, all of the management, all of the risk, right? All right, termination, as I said earlier, at any time by either side. And so separately I have that like the employee shall give a 3-week notice. But again, like if they've really decided that they're going to the beach, like let them go. And then this is another point, right? I've had this argued a couple of times, that the employee gets paid as a function of them being the employee. Once they are done being the employee, they are done getting paid. And so occasionally I'll get the argument, well, I did this work, I'm supposed to get 25% of the collections, and you're going to collect that money anyhow. It was like, no, you only get paid as a function of being an employee. When you're no longer an employee, you no longer get paid. Beyond that, I'm going to have huge expenses in replacing you, and I got to pay to collect the money, right? And so we make it clear up front, they understand it. I've had that fight twice. You could add in some survivor rights in terms of both estate planning, right? You could ask to create key person life insurance so that if you died, the practice ends up, or the associate ends up paying for the premium. If you die, your estate gets paid the value of the policy, and the associate gets the practice. And so it's a little bit pricey, but it's for the 35 to 45 healthy people, it's something to actually look at if you have a long-term associate to work with. Once you have more than one doc, there's other ways of addressing disability insurance, which is also really important. I had a good friend this week that had a life-threatening situation. Looks like he's going to be okay, but right, disability is a key issue. So those are the issues. When I sit down, so we've done the first interview, I've done the second interview, I've done the dinner date, I've talked about the work agreement, and then I'm going to sit down across from them, right? And that also to remind me, on the website, on the training website, there is 2 extra lessons. One is me going over the work agreement with an associate in a meeting like this over the internet, and the other is a live telephone interview, and you should review both of those. But like particularly for your next one, your first one, you should be kind of knee to knee, and you are agreeing to the rules of the relationship. You want to review it and explain it point by point. You're looking for their excitement of like, this is the best opportunity for me that I could ever hope for, which, by the way, is the best opportunity for them that they could hope for. Right? When you're reviewing some of the sensitive areas, the non-compete, the financial agreement, the pay, and the opportunity of what the real lifetime opportunity is, again, you want to see all the good indicators that you should see. They should be excited. The question should make sense. It should be, about building the practice and then about building them, and it should feel good to you. Right? You get it signed, you sign it, they sign it, there's 2 copies, the associate gets one, you get one. As I said before, in the olden days, I used to take it down to the bank safety deposit box. I had all of my signed work agreements. Those days are over. Again, you can digitize it, scan it, and again, as I said at the very beginning of the call, perhaps some of you weren't even on it, just as a related side tidbit, you should really work on thinking about the organization of all of your documents. And at this point, the vast majority, if not all of it, should be digital in the cloud. And so if you could become 1, 2, 3 steps better than you are today by tomorrow or next week or next month and move in the right direction, it's very beneficial. And so making sure that you have signed work agreements in the cloud that you can access whenever is important. I had one work agreement that got stolen from the employee's physical work file back in the days of every employee having a file in my desk in my doctor's office, right? We had a practice in this suite of this building in Cranberry, Pennsylvania, one of the largest counties at the time. This was an 8-year process, right? Long for me. It felt a little bit aggravating at times, right? So through a bunch of struggles, we still ended up, $200,000, $210,000 in operating profit, and then a super successful sale. And the doc, Dr. S, the doc that bought it, he's still cranking there, and it's his dream practice, and it's providing for his family and all of his employees and patients, and still this community. The people that own this building have now had an active tenant for 13 years, right? And so it's this win-win-win. Right, being fundamental in the community, right? Again, like any situation, the first doc, right? This is something, what are the common failures? So the first doc had self-sabotage, and this is something that's out there where there are a group of people that won't allow themselves to be successful. And so right off of the gate, he got to 100 a week quickly, and then just refused to right, we fought over specific things, and it's dotting the I's and crossing the T's and all of the grind every day, and he never really wanted to see 200, right? Dr. R was kind of, I would say that my comment is that he was too meek, and not that any personality can be successful, right? But you need to own it and still be able to interface with your patients, with the market, and to tell them what you think is best and to drive people through that. And so I really think in his heart, he felt that anything more than an 8 or 12 visit model was out of line. And so we had a bunch of conversations about that, and ultimately he left. Dr. W was just kind of like a party dude, and there's probably even more stuff about Dr. W that I don't know, that perhaps I should know, but I don't want to know. And so, ultimately, he never produced. But Dr. S, he came he was a long-term successful associate, and he wanted to have his own office, and he lived somewhat near the area, and he brought in all of the skills that he had, and he leveraged it relatively fast, and, has gone on to double from the point of where he bought it. And again, it's still there serving the community, and everybody's happy. Right? And so what I want to do now is take the time and just actually review the work agreement, which is over here. And so, right, so you can use this again. There's a watermark on it. I want you to go to a lawyer in your state. So effective today, although this didn't update, right, this would be today's date, for an undetermined period, Dr. Associate, hereinafter called employee, and Dr. Owner agree to enter in at your practice. It's agreed that I'm the owner, I have all the responsibility, all the liabilities, right? You're the employee. Your job is to work hard, right? You have no say in the management or the responsibility of it. What this means is we're doing things my way, right? You ever want to do something that I think is going to help, am I going to say no? If you're going to do something where I feel that there's a heavy reason to say no, I'm going to explain it to you. My decision is going to prevail, right? You are the successful entity. We can agree to amend this agreement at any time by agreeing to it, right? I'm going to supply everything, all of the space, the equipment, the supplies, the utilities, the capital, the clerical services. And if you're talking about, trying to open an office for a doc, right? And when we open your office, that means investing somewhere around $100,000, right? You're going to be an official employee, right? So I'm going to withhold all the taxes that we're supposed to hold. Additionally, I'm going to withhold, I pay half of the malpractice, you pay the other half, but I withhold it each check and then I pay the bill. Why would I pay the bill, Dr. Associate? And the ones that you're going to hire understand so that you're sure that it's paid. Right. You need to have 1 million, 3 million of occurrence. Do you understand the difference? Do you have insurance now? Is it occurrence or is it claims made? Number one answer, of course, is I don't know. Right? But you need to have that verified. And if it is occurrence, you need to come up with a solution to get them into, if it's claims made, you need to get them to occurrence when they start working for you. And so if you got to buy the tail and however that money, you got to figure that out. They got to have 1 million, 3 million occurrence from the day that they start with you. All right. After 90 days, you get to participate in the health insurance policy. Our policy is I contribute $200 a month. If you can find it on the marketplace, whatever plan you pick, I contribute $200 a month. If you bring any of your property into the office, any desks, chairs, equipments, books, or anything else, you'll label it property of Dr. Associate, right? Otherwise, everything in the office is mine. Furthermore, all of the patient records, case histories, x-rays, labs, mailing list, other associated, this is all the legalese for anything related to any of the records of any of the patients that have ever been in the office is my property, right? Anyone that's been associated with this practice for whatever reason, right? Without express written consent from me, you may not copy, summarize, reproduce in any manner. So the records are mine. Either party may make termination at any time, and I explained what I explained to you earlier about that. And so here's my non-compete again. My goal is just to protect the area that would really hurt me. If you violated this, I would consider that you were stealing from me, right? So you will not engage in any other business venture or private practice competitive to that of Dr. Owner Clinic without prior consent in writing of Dr. Owner, as long as he is an employee of Dr. Owner Clinic. In order to protect the business and the goodwill, the employee agrees that for a period of 2 years after termination or cessation of employment for any reason, 2 years for any reason, the employee will not directly or indirectly interfere with, solicit, divert, or attempt to disrupt the relationship, contractual or otherwise, between Dr. Lee Newman, Newman Chiropractic Center, and any patient of Dr. Newman, or provide services to any patient of Dr. Owner within the zip codes of or a 5-mile radius of any office that Dr. Newman owns or which you were an employee of. And so if they, you could probably eliminate this sentence if they worked in your main office and now they're going to a satellite. So we're still protecting the original radius and now the new radius. Or they were an employee doc at one satellite and now you're going to move them to another satellite. It would protect both of those. Right? You will not engage in any other activity as a consultant, independent contractor, agent, employee, officer, sole proprietor, partner, or otherwise that competes with Dr. Owner. Again, within those zip codes or a 5-mile radius of anywhere that you worked in the last 12 months. You will not directly or indirectly solicit or provide names or information to others to aid in the solicitation of or be involved in the hiring of employees. Employee covenants agrees not to communicate or to divulge to any person, firm, or corporation, either directly or indirectly, and to hold in strict confidence for the benefit of Dr. Owner all of the secret, confidential information belonging to Dr. Owner, including patient lists, identity of patients. Employee will not, during the employment or after termination for any reason, communicate or divulge any knowledge to any or data to any person, firm, other than who we designate. And so I'm reading this for you just in terms of making sure that at least once in your life you've actually read word for word a non-compete clause. It is hereby agreed that the employee will inform the doctor of any plans that he may have in regards to his termination when in fact such exists. Intention to terminate are clear actions, leasing office space, professional advertisements, placement of advertising in any media or other advertising methods not expressly approved by doctor owned or in writing. Arrangement for telephone service listings in the directory of the doctor of chiropractic by employee. The leasing or purchasing of professional equipment by employee. The advertising to patients of the senior doc of his intentions to leave the practice, or any other step in the establishment of private practice chiropractic shall signify the employee's intention. Right? Employee hereby that this is necessary, that the restrictions are reasonable, that it's a condition of employment, that you have no intention of violating it, and that you've gotten valuable consideration, which is this job, in exchange for it, right? And so here's the penalties. Employee stipulates that any breach of this covenant not to compete. So if you breach it, it's going to bring harm to us. For these reasons, we have the right to attain preliminary, temporary, permanent, mandatory, or restraining injunctions, injunctive relief, right? Padlocking their office, as well as $2,000 a month for 24 months of liquidated damages. And again, all of this is going to be dependent on your state and what you're able to do. And so you want to have a serious penalty, but again, it's only for a violation that you would deem is stealing from you, which in fact is what it is. All right, employee acknowledges that Dr. Senior is expending substantial monies in the development of Dr. Associate. Therefore, any competition with Dr. Senior by employee would be taking property belonging to Dr. Senior essentially without purchasing the same. Accordingly, the covenant not to compete and confidentiality provision and liquidated damages are reasonable and necessary. So that's the end of the non-compete. Great. KPL, lease contract, solid. I've used it once. Thanks. The agreement so this is the doctor's financial agreement. The agreement by the undersigned doc states that we plan to bill as correctly as possible. If any checks or monies of any sort comes in his name with his numbers of any sort, it's still the property of the office, right? Accordingly, the doctor agrees that any payment professional made to him will be promptly turned over to Dr. Senior. This provision includes, but is not limited to, any period where payment is received after employment with doctor. So that they forward their address, and they get an insurance check, right? You can be 100% sure that they're going to deposit that money, right? And so this is clearly defining that. Employee shall have a base pay. This was an old work agreement. So let's say it's $27.50 now. His actual pay shall be either the base pay or 25% of the collections for patients assigned to him, which is ever greater. Specifically, this does not preclude the employee from rendering services to patients not assigned to him, for which no compensation shall be derived. So part of the benefit that we get is they cover our practices, right? And so I always want this to be fair. And in all honesties, in the 20 plus years I've been doing it, I had one time, and it was a mild, it wasn't even aggressive at all, where somebody felt that the distribution of new patients and covering each other's patients was inequitable. And we fixed it super fast, and it's really not been an issue. So if your intention and the associate's intention is to make it fair and equitable, as they gain confidence and skills, they're given more responsibility and more benefits, this works out. However, by definition, every patient into the practice is ours, and we can assign it to whoever we want to assign it for any reason. But again, it's not like we're trying to make our associates fail. So I want them to succeed, and I want to do what's fair and reasonable. Continuing ed, if they quit, that's the end of their pay. It's an agreement in Pennsylvania. I sign it, you sign it, and that's the work agreement. And again, so I probably have 10 or 15 more minutes. I do just want to come up. Any questions by email, by chat, or by audio line? Anyone? All right, very good. Let's keep going. You guys are hanging in there. So I go to a second work agreement when I promote my associate to a clinic director in a new office. And basically, it's the same work agreement. They sign it before they start at the new office, right? And it goes into effect when and if the new office opens. And so it just identifies a couple of other points. And so this agreement signed today for an undetermined period of time, this agreement will go into effect upon the opening of the satellite practice. Should this office not open, then this agreement will be null and void, and the old work agreement shall remain in effect. So that's the first issue there, right? Whereas you started here, and now you're getting promoted, we've agreed, and so in consideration of becoming clinic director, all the basis of the first agreement are in effect. I'm still going to supply everything, all of that stuff. You're still going to be an employee with withholdings. You still need $1 million, $3 million of malpractice. You still need to mark your stuff as yours. All the records are mine. You could terminate at any time. You're not gonna non-compete, and so again, the non-compete is the same, except it's both radiuses for both offices, where they were and where they're going. And like I would tell them this up front, even like when they're signing the first work agreement, so it's no surprise, we need to protect us, right? So this is the similar non-compete and what the damages are. Okay, employee stipulates in the event 24 months and injunctive relief. All right, all right. The financial agreement again. Any money that comes in the associate's name, even at a satellite office, is our money. They stipulate to all that. They get paid, and so again, there's the base pay or continuing ed. I missed I missed the whole point of this agreement. Hang on. Sorry about this. I had it earlier. This is important. Just hang in there with me. Sorry about this. There's a paragraph about purchase. Still in the non-compete. Sorry, here it is. So employees shall have an option to purchase the practice known as Satellite Chiropractic Office, subject to the pre-existing contractual obligations of this agreement. He may purchase the practice for whatever the amount is, we'll talk about that. This includes equipment, patient files of that office, but does not include accounts receivable. Additionally, the employee has the option to purchase the accounts receivable for 30% of the gross accounts receivable. All right, and so a couple of things about this slide, and it is to set a price. So as I told you on day one, it sets a price. I want to go back. And so you're not working against yourself. I'm going to talk about setting that price. In fact, let's do it now. And so the question becomes, why sell the practice? And so one is, it's the game that we've decided. It completes the cycle. It helps us convert all of the risk of running a practice into all of the reward of selling a practice. It's a big fun payday when you sell a practice. A lot of that money becomes capital gains. But ultimately, what does the 200 visit a week DC want? And they need to own their own practice. And so we give a pathway for our associates to become warriors just like us. And so we get paid for helping them do that, right? And so it becomes important. So we pre-agree on the price. So they're not working against themselves. The AR. So I don't want to include the AR. I do want to include the AR so that the associate has working capital along the way. But I have found that the 30% number is a magic number where here's what I want and here's what that number achieves. What I want is from day one until ever is that everybody works as hard as possible to collect as efficiently as possible. And so if you just give them the AR, like they can slow down collections the last 3, 4, 5 months as they're trying to buy the practice to like pick it up after they own it. And like if they accelerate it too much, then the AR is too lean. But I want the AR to be as real as possible, as tight as possible, every single day from day one, from right now for forever. And so whatever that tight number is, it's 30%. And so I figure they've earned 25% of it. In my system, like another chunk of it's going to be a write-off. And so we end up splitting what's left, right? It's the second time that we split. And so here's how I would think about pricing a practice for your second work agreement. Again, I believe that the value of the practice is 12 months worth of collections. And really, my experience has been with every single practice sale, because the doc that built the practice is buying the practice really only expands after they buy it. And so there's actually built-in equity beyond that. But 200 visits a week is 10,000 visits a year. At $50 a visit is $500,000. But I'm not going to charge you that, associate. Instead of collections for a year, I'm only going to charge you 10 months worth of collections at $150 a week, right? And so that comes out to $325,000, which is my current price, right? But that builds in a sweat equity of $175. And so if you get beyond 200 a week, and I'm here to supply everything that you need to do it, I want you to do it. If you get beyond 200 a week, then the value of the practice is even more, right? It's still worth doing at $150 a week, and in fact, because it's only 10 months, it's still worth owning even at like $125 a week. But I don't want that to be the case, right? I want you to earn the sweat equity, and so the day that you buy the practice, you start earning at $200,000 a year. And so this is the conversation when I'm presenting this work agreement that I have. So day one for your associate, right? So they've now signed and they show up at the office. I want to make sure there's a license. I want to see it. Any other necessary things like a license in Pennsylvania, they need to have a adjunctive therapy certificate. They might need to have an x-ray certificate or any other thing that they might need to have. I want to have the declaration page of a 1 to 3 million occurrence malpractice policy covering the doc. You probably need to be listed as a co-insured, the practice or you need to talk to your malpractice person about that. They need to sign off on the office policy, and they need to hit the ground running on their training manual for the rest of their lives, just like you and me, right? How to market better, how to retain better, how to get paid better. And so we're going to get them right to work and throw them into the deep end of the pool, right? Your homework is to have a usable, which means you've gotten it okayed by an in-state labor lawyer, work agreement that you can present to your next associate. I want you to review either this presentation and or my samples and understand the work agreement issues, right? How long until an associate bonuses? And so generically in my system, they bonus at $12,000 a month. And so it should really be certainly by the 6th month, but like 3rd or 4th month, right? And again, in our training, we want to have these kind of mileposts in place. And again, This is the underlying issue. It's difficult to recruit, right? We don't get to talk to many docs. Most of them don't have the ability to succeed, or at least in our practices. And so when we hire somebody, we want to invest everything that we can in them, which is what we typically do. And success, like for all of us, doing 100 a week doesn't sound like it's that big of a deal. And even at 0, it seems like you're right close to 100 a week. And at 100 a week, it's going to work for everybody. At more than that, it's even better. But ultimately, if the associate doesn't, the associate gets to 60 a week, right? It's only 40 visits. It's 10 more people a day, 4 days a week. Like in our minds, like just go do it. But like the proof is in the pudding. And if they don't do it, again, it's part of being interviewing all the time. And we need to hold them accountable for not almost doing it, but for doing it. And again, for all the reasons. We're involved, but a lot of other people are involved as well. So I'd like to hear and or read some takeaways from today. Dr. Steve, you have a takeaway? Hey, yeah, Pete, Dr. Pete. $1 million. Yes. And so the very first practice I didn't do this, and like the guy was at like 130 visits in 7 weeks, and I sat him down and I showed him that if he grew it to X, he'd have to pay Y, and if he grew it to X plus 10%, then he had to pay Y plus 20%, and like he was working against himself. And so the conversation is 200 a week is my par value. If you've got a different mindset and 300 a week is your par value, then you can use that. Ultimately, it's what you can negotiate with your employee. But like, again, my par value is 200 a week. It's 10,000 visits a year. It makes the math easy. And so, at my number at $50 a visit, it's only $500,000. But at $70 a visit, it's $700,000. But again, you don't even have to pay that because I'm only going to charge you for 150 visits a week and only 10 months worth. And so even in that case, like you get shown up with, someone shows up for $400,000 and they buy $1 million practice that you made 250 clear on in 3 years. Are you not happy? The 50,000 foot level is if someone's going to show up with a check for my full sales price, I'm going to take it. In the real world, no one's able to do it in less than 6 months. And then there's this secondary kind of weird issue. Once I almost had a problem with this. It's got to go at least 12 months for the capital gains to be capital gains. And so, like, theoretically, it's possible for that to happen, but in the real world, it's not really likely. And so even in that case, if you wanted to pay the associate as if he owned it until you could officially close, and like you got something along the way for that, like I might do it that way. Did you duplicate that? Excellent. Mike Hill, a takeaway. Dr. Fenn. Yeah. Each insurance company in each area acts differently. And so ultimately, I think that it's one of those mutual mystification zones, because my belief is that the provider rep that the insurance company is going to send to you guys, my belief is that they are trained to lie to you. And so there's no way to get an honest answer. Like maybe someone else has been through it or it's been defined already, but like the proof is going to be in the pudding. But in terms of this conversation, whatever happens, any monies that are collected for services within your walls is your money. It's good. Dr. Anthony? Good, how are you? I don't address that in my work agreement. It is once we're down to working, it's the only conversation I have. You're responsible to do three things: recruit new patients. And so my goal for them is my goal for any chiropractor. And until you reach this, it's one new patient per calendar day, 365 a year, generically 30 a month. And I'd want every associate to have that as his or her goal, is to get to a PVA of 25 and to get to $50 a visit collected. And so I build, again, monthly battle plans, which drill down to daily actions to make those three things happen. But ultimately, the measurement is by monies collected, and that's reflective of it's reflective of everything, and so perhaps visits as well. But if they got to 100 visits a week and they were collecting half as well as they should, it would still be an issue. I'd probably work with them a little bit longer and make sure that it's not BS visits that we can never get paid for. But if they never hit the question becomes, at what amount of money is it good enough? And if you're just going to be 2 docs, it's good enough, or does it allow you to expand to a 3rd doc? And so again, at 100 a week, it's enough. 200 is better, but 100 a week is enough. So did that answer your question? Yes. Except in the real world, what happens is that you triage. And so I have seen senior docs give way too much to the associates. And so, but it's like anything else that we want to succeed. Perhaps if I had a child, I could relate even a little bit more. But as an associate exhibits success, then I would give them more. So it could be that there are certain types of patients that you don't enjoy working with for whatever reason, that you don't enjoy working with them. Whether it's payment source or symptom or presentation type, or the person who says I can normally handle pain or whatever it is. And so you give them those because you don't want them, or you want the associate to see them. But ultimately, the associate needs to be responsible for generating their own new patients. As they're successful, again, let's say you're doing 30 new patients a month and you bring in the associate, and now you, the associate, and maybe a half a CA are now producing 60 new patients a month. I would want it to be split 50-50, but it might not be that every single patient that you got, you kept, and every single patient the associate got, he or she kept. You still get to decide who gets who. And so it brings up another point. If you have a killer payment source, you got killer insurance or it's great PI or something, and the associate happens to get one, right? Unless you're confident the associate is not going to spoil the relationship, it's still your patient. You could still decide to keep it. But again, my goal is not to sabotage the associate. And so if I did that, I would do it because I felt that the associate was in jeopardy of losing the relationship and losing the patient. And so I kept it, and then I might replace it with 2 or 3 other new patients that are less revenue. Does that make sense? Yeah. It's good. Kevin, a comment, question? Thank you. All right. Any final questions or comments? Thanks for hanging in there with me. I thought today was kind of going to be shorter, but I guess it really never is. But that's a good thing. This is the most important thing for all of you on this call, listening to this video later, right? Again, and we probably more than just me, right, know who I'm referring to. So imagine that, effective immediately, that you were never able to adjust somebody again. And so, let's hope that never happens for any of us, but, it would give you even more leverage to be able to keep your entity going with all of the ramifications about that. So thanks, everybody. In 2 weeks, we're going to do training, right? So we've been through, it's day one, the associate shows up, now what? And so I'm looking forward to that. As always, if you have any questions or comments, if you want to talk about any issue related to this or your practice in general, please feel free to reach out to me, and I'll talk to you guys in 2 weeks.